In March 1918, a massive U.S. Navy ship carrying over 300 crew vanished without a trace somewhere in the vast Atlantic Ocean. No distress signals, no wreckage, no survivors. This is the chilling story of the USS Cyclops, one of the greatest maritime mysteries in American history. Join us as we dive deep into the unexplained disappearance that still haunts naval experts and historians over a century later. The USS Cyclops was a giant collier, tasked with carrying vital supplies during World War I. But on a routine voyage from Brazil to Baltimore, she simply disappeared, and with her, more than 300 crew members. To this day, no confirmed wreckage has ever been found. What happened on that fateful trip? Was it a tragic accident, sabotage, or something stranger? Explore the haunting facts, theories, and lasting impact of this unsolved naval disaster in our detailed investigation. At the turn of the 20th century, the world was undergoing a transformation unlike anything it had ever known. Steel and steam replaced sail and wood, and the open seas, once ruled by schooners and clippers, were now dominated by towering iron leviathans. Among the mightiest of these was the USS Cyclops, a behemoth of the U.S. Navy's auxiliary force, built not to fight but to feed the war machine that now loomed across Europe. Launched in May of 1910 from the Mare Island Navy Yard in California, Cyclops was a colossus of her time, 542 feet in length, 65 feet across the beam, and capable of displacing over 19,000 tons when fully loaded. Her design was utilitarian, not graceful, long, dark, and brooding. She was a collier, a ship meant to carry vast quantities of coal to fuel other naval vessels. Her mission was simple: deliver coal wherever it was needed. Yet her fate would be anything but. In those years before the First World War, a vessel like the Cyclops was vital to naval strategy. The United States was emerging as a global power, and its fleet needed energy. The Cyclops served as a lifeline to ships patrolling distant waters, hauling black coal across the Atlantic and Caribbean like veins carrying blood to a beating heart. Her role might have seemed mundane to outsiders, but within her steel walls, the crew knew the weight of the responsibility they carried, and the dangers that came with it. The Atlantic, after all, was no friend to the unwary. From brutal storms to unseen shoals, to the ever-present threat of mechanical failure, the ocean tested every ship and sailor. But there was also something else, something darker, lurking in hushed sailor tales and whispered warnings. A stretch of ocean where things disappeared. Even then, the term Bermuda Triangle had not yet entered the cultural vocabulary, but stories of ghost ships, vanishing vessels, and magnetic anomalies were already circulating in ports from Norfolk to Nassau. The Cyclops, though, was considered strong, reliable, and almost invincible. With a steel hull nearly 5 inches thick and a capacity to carry over 10,000 tons of coal or manganese, she was a floating fortress of commerce and logistics. She had served both military and civilian missions, ferrying materials for the Navy, aiding relief efforts in Mexico, and making supply runs to South America. Her crew of over 300 men, a mix of seasoned Navy personnel and newly conscripted sailors, were a hardened and diverse bunch. They hailed from all corners of the United States, from the coastal towns of New England to the industrial cities of the Midwest. Some joined for patriotism, some for paychecks. Few suspected that they were stepping aboard a ship destined to become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in U.S. naval history. At her helm was Commander George W. Worley, a strict and enigmatic officer whose German heritage would become a source of suspicion and controversy in the months to come. Described by some crew as odd and harsh, he was known for walking the deck in his underwear and carrying a riding crop. Still, he had navigated the Cyclops through difficult voyages before. No one, at least not publicly, questioned his authority. In the early months of 1918, the Cyclops was tasked with a mission critical to the war effort. With the world engulfed in the flames of World War I, manganese, a key element in steel production, had become a precious commodity. The ship was to sail from Brazil, carrying thousands of tons of the heavy ore, and deliver it to Baltimore. From there, it would be distributed to munitions plants and shipbuilders racing to support the Allies. It was meant to be just another voyage, but it would be her last. When the Cyclops departed the port of Salvador, Brazil, in late February of 1918, the weather was calm and the sea cooperative. She made a scheduled stop in Barbados on March 3rd to refuel and resupply. Then, on March 4th, she set sail for Baltimore and vanished from the face of the earth. No distress calls, no debris, no trace. The U.S. Navy's largest loss of life outside of combat would soon unfold into one of the most confounding maritime mysteries of all time. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, questions multiplied. Rumors of espionage, sabotage, mutiny, and even supernatural forces began to swirl. And all that remained was silence. Before it became a ghost ship, the USS Cyclops was the pride of a rapidly expanding naval force. Built during an era of optimism, industry, and military preparation, she represented the promise of American strength at sea. Yet from her very beginning, the ship carried a strange, almost mythic weight that would only grow heavier over time. Commissioned by the U.S. Navy in 1910, the Cyclops was one of four sister colliers, Proteus, Nereus, and Jupiter. She was constructed at the May Island Navy Yard in Vallejo, California, then one of the most advanced naval shipyards in the United States. The Navy had tasked its engineers with designing a vessel that could hold massive quantities of coal across vast oceans while being durable enough to withstand storms and wartime conditions. What emerged was a floating steel fortress, ungainly, unarmed, but undeniably powerful. She was 542 feet long, 65 feet wide, and sat deep in the water when fully loaded, with a draft of 27 feet. Her twin masts and boxes superstructure gave her the silhouette of a floating warehouse. She could carry over 10,000 tons of coal or ore, and when full, her displacement exceeded 19,000 tons. She was powered by a single-screw steam engine and two vertical triple expansion engines, providing a cruising speed of just over 50 knots. But despite her impressive specs, the Cyclops was never meant for speed. She was a workhorse, a slow-moving lifeline to America's global ambitions. Her purpose wasn't to chase battleships or outmaneuver enemies, but to feed the Navy's hungry engines, to ferry resources, and to keep America's growing fleet moving. The Cyclops was launched with little fanfare in May 1910, and by June, she was already underway on her first missions, delivering coal and supplies along the Pacific coast. Over the next few years, she would be reassigned multiple times, crisscrossing oceans between Norfolk, Havana, Mexico, and the Caribbean. She was often seen docked in Rio de Janeiro or loading up in the ports of Bahia. Her steel belly was always full of something, whether it was coal, manganese, or naval supplies. Yet for all her utility, there were oddities from the start. Some engineers quietly questioned the structural soundness of the ship's long, flat keel. Others worried about her hull integrity when fully loaded with dense cargo like ore. The manganese ore she would eventually carry during her final voyage was not only heavier than coal, but prone to shifting dangerously in rough seas if not properly secured. And there were personnel issues. Captain George W. Worley, assigned to command the Cyclops in 1917, had a reputation that rippled through Navy circles. German-born but naturalized as a U.S. citizen, Worley was seen by many as abrasive, authoritarian, and socially aloof. He enforced strict discipline aboard his ship but was known to exhibit strange behaviors, such as conducting drills at odd hours, pacing the deck alone at night, and, most notably, reportedly wearing nothing but long underwear and a pistol belt while inspecting the crew. Worley's command style polarized the sailors. Some respected him as an old-school sea dog, firm but capable. Others described him as paranoid and unpredictable. During one incident in late 1917, a few officers raised concerns about his mental state and alleged pro-German sympathies. Though these claims were never formally pursued, they would resurface with a vengeance after the Cyclops vanished. Still, during her first 7 years of service, the Cyclops completed her missions without incident. She survived storms, mechanical failures, and the kind of wear and tear that would have ended lesser ships. She became a familiar presence in foreign ports, her size and dark bulk making her instantly recognizable to locals and sailors alike. To most, she was just another part of the Navy's growing logistical backbone. But as the world edged into the chaos of the First World War, the ship's assignments grew more urgent and dangerous. The demand for materials like manganese skyrocketed. Used to strengthen steel, Manganese was suddenly as valuable as gold to armament factories and shipbuilders. Brazil, one of the richest sources of manganese ore, became a critical supplier, and the Cyclops was sent repeatedly to South America to haul the mineral north. It was during these trips that the ship began to show subtle signs of trouble. In 1917, one engineer noted that the ship seemed to ride heavier than usual, especially in turbulent waters. A report surfaced about an unusual creaking near the midship cargo hold. And in early 1918, just weeks before her final voyage, a message was logged that some of the structural beams were showing early signs of metal fatigue. The warnings were noted, but not acted upon. War doesn't wait. By February 1918, the Cyclops was en route to Brazil once again, where she would load her heaviest cargo yet, over 10,000 tons of dense manganese ore. She would be bringing it back to Baltimore, a routine voyage on paper, but a trip from which no one would return. As she departed Rio and made her way toward her final stop in Barbados, the ship's fate had already been sealed. Whether by sabotage of leadership, mechanical failure, or something far stranger, none aboard knew what awaited them. The Cyclops had been born into an age of steel and empire, but even steel can vanish into water and take 306 souls with it. Long before the mystery, before the headlines, before the silence that swallowed the USS Cyclops, there were voices, young, old, weary, and eager. These were men of flesh and bone, sailors and officers drawn from every corner of the country, each with his own story, hopes, and reasons for boarding the massive collier. They were not ghosts, yet. The ship's roster listed 306 souls. Many were seasoned Navy men, but a large portion were merchant marine crew, laborers, and new enlistees who had joined up in a time when war shadowed the world. Letters home, diary fragments, and recorded interviews with family members, compiled in the months following the ship's disappearance, offer brief glimpses into the lives behind the names. Seaman First Class James Jimmy Lorne, 22, wrote to his sister in Philadelphia just 2 weeks before the ship departed Brazil. "This ship is big, sis. Real big. We move like a slug, but we carry enough coal to choke a city. Captain doesn't say much, but he watches everything. We had a scare last night. Some cargo shifted and gave us a jolt. I nearly fell out of my bunk, but the fellas say that's normal with ore. I miss cold mornings and mom's coffee." Jimmy was one of dozens of sailors from Pennsylvania. His last letter was dated February 19, 1918. It arrived 2 days after the ship was reported missing. Petty Officer Samuel Osei, a Ghanaian-American crewman from New York, had worked aboard merchant vessels before enlisting in the Navy. His cousin, interviewed in the 1940s, recalled Sam being uneasy before his final voyage. "He told me, 'This ship doesn't ride right. Something's off with the balance. We're heavy in the center. If a wave catches us bad, we're going to split like driftwood.'" I thought he was exaggerating, but he didn't smile when he said it. Osei's engineering knowledge and natural caution made him a respected presence below deck. He had survived storms off Newfoundland and U-boat sightings in the Atlantic. But on the Cyclops, his letters took on a darker tone. Engineer's mate Howard Dempsey, 30, from Savannah, Georgia, wrote often to his wife, Ruth. One letter in particular stands out, written during a stop in Rio de Janeiro. The captain keeps mostly to himself. Strange fellow. Walks the deck late at night, talking low. A few of the men think he's not right in the head. One morning, he dressed down a sailor for speaking German to another lad. Called him a spy. Maybe he's just stressed. This war has everyone rattled. The captain, George W. Woolley, was a figure both respected and feared. A native of Germany who had immigrated to the U.S. decades earlier under the name Johann Frederick Wickman, Woolley had been naturalized and eventually climbed Navy ranks under his new identity. His command of the Cyclops had lasted nearly 2 years by 1918, and while his nautical abilities were rarely challenged, his erratic behavior drew quiet concern from some of his officers. One junior officer, whose identity remains anonymous in Navy archives, reported that Woolley had taken to pacing the bridge in silence for hours, mumbling to himself about sabotage. The officer also claimed Woolley insisted on maintaining strict light discipline at sea, even in clear weather and with no known threats nearby. He acted like we were being watched, the officer noted. It wasn't just the captain. Strange tensions seemed to ripple through the lower decks. There were arguments about the cargo. Some claimed the manganese had been loaded unevenly or had shifted during earlier parts of the voyage. Others complained about low morale, unusual creaking sounds in the hull, and the oppressive heat in the Caribbean leg of their journey. Yet even with those misgivings, no one could have predicted that the Cyclops would vanish entirely. The men wrote about getting home, about seeing snow again, about new babies they hadn't yet met. There were dreams of promotions, plans to buy land, proposals waiting to be made. And then, nothing. When the ship failed to arrive in Baltimore by its expected date in mid-March 1918, family members waited by mailboxes, unsure whether to fear a delay or death notice. One by one, letters from the Navy arrived. We regret to inform you that the USS Cyclops has been declared missing. Extensive search efforts have revealed no trace of the vessel or its crew. Further investigation is ongoing. That message, or some version of it, was delivered to more than 300 homes across the country. For the families, the absence was unbearable. There were no bodies to bury, no wreckage to examine, no final words. Just memories of letters, flickering photographs, and rumors that grew louder with every year that passed. And so, the Cyclops became a mystery. But before that, it was a ship full of lives, men with laughter, frustrations, fears, and routines. Their words remain, fragile as paper. Their ship does not. At the helm of the USS Cyclops stood a man as enigmatic as the ship's fate itself. Commander George W. Woolley, by official records, was a capable officer with decades of maritime experience. But behind the uniform, the medals, and the authority lay a tangled past, one that would come under intense scrutiny in the wake of the Cyclops' disappearance. Born in Germany in 1865 under the name Johann Frederick Wickman, Woolley immigrated to the United States as a young man. At some point in the late 19th century, he assumed a new identity, changing his name to George William Woolley, and began working his way through the ranks of the American Merchant Marine. His rise was slow but steady, earning recognition for his navigation skills and eventually securing a commission in the U.S. Navy. The name change, while not uncommon among immigrants at the time, became a point of deep suspicion once the ship disappeared, especially given the context of World War I. Anti-German sentiment in the United States was at a boiling point. Across the country, German immigrants were being surveilled, harassed, and sometimes detained. So when 306 lives vanished under the command of a man with a German birth certificate and a questionable past, people demanded answers. Woolley's personality didn't help his case. To his crew, he was a paradox, highly disciplined yet erratic, aloof yet controlling. Numerous reports described him as eccentric, particularly during long voyages. He was known to conduct surprise inspections at night, wearing only his undergarments and a holstered pistol. He would sometimes chastise junior officers in front of enlisted men, only to retreat silently to his cabin for hours afterward. Rumors circulated among the sailors that he kept a log not just of the ship's location and fuel usage, but of personal grievances and perceived acts of disloyalty. He was a ghost walking in daylight, one former crewman from an earlier voyage recalled. Always watching, always muttering. We joked that the ship wasn't haunted, the captain was. More troubling, however, were the allegations of pro-German sympathies. During a stop in Rio de Janeiro in 1917, Woolley reportedly ordered the arrest of a crewman for speaking German on deck, accusing him of spying. But when questioned, the sailor explained that he was simply singing an old folk song with another crewman from Wisconsin. The man was later released without charges, but the incident was documented in Navy files. To some, it suggested paranoia. To others, it was projection. Was Woolley hiding something? Further investigations after the Cyclops disappeared revealed that Woolley had never fully disclosed the circumstances of his immigration, nor why he had changed his name. His naturalization documents were incomplete, and multiple aliases were linked to his shipping credentials in the late 1800s. While none of this proved criminal behavior, it raised uncomfortable questions, particularly in wartime. The idea of a double agent wasn't unthinkable in 1918. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, and there were known cases of sabotage on American soil. The theory that Captain Worley may have intentionally diverted the ship or collaborated with the enemy gained traction in the press. Some newspapers ran headlines suggesting he had scuttled the ship and escaped to Germany. But those claims had one fatal flaw. No one ever found the ship. If Captain Worley had betrayed his country, what did he gain? Where did he go? No messages were intercepted. No traces of the Cyclops or her cargo were ever located. No German vessel reported a kill. The ocean kept its secrets. Still, the psychological profile of Worley remained an unsettling piece of the puzzle. Some former Navy officers defended him, calling him a strict man, but fair. They insisted his past had no bearing on his service record, and that the Cyclops had been in perfectly capable hands. But others weren't so sure. In the years following the disaster, Worley became a symbol of distrust, of the unknown, of all the uncomfortable questions surrounding the Cyclops that no official report could answer. Did the captain crack under pressure and steer his ship into ruin? Was he a saboteur with a hidden agenda? Or was he simply another victim, one of the 306 lives swallowed whole by the sea? No court-martial would ever be held. No tribunal would ever take place. The Navy's final verdict: missing, presumed lost. And Captain George W. Worley, the man whose shadow still lingers over the Cyclops, became one of the most mysterious figures in naval history, not remembered for what he did, but for what he might have done. By early 1918, the Atlantic Ocean was no longer just a thoroughfare for trade and travel. It was a war zone, a vast, unpredictable battlefield that stretched from the shores of Europe to the Caribbean Sea, where unseen enemies lurked beneath the waves and the line between peace and peril had all but disappeared. The United States had officially entered World War I less than a year earlier, in April 1917. It was a reluctant entry, triggered in part by Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, which targeted not just enemy vessels but also civilian and neutral ships. German U-boats, stealthy and deadly, had begun slicing through Allied shipping routes like knives through fabric, sinking freighters, troop ships, and tankers without warning. The Navy scrambled to respond. Convoys were hastily organized. Merchant ships were fitted with guns. Training ramped up. But the German submarine fleet remained an elusive predator. At their peak, U-boats were sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping each month. Fear traveled faster than the ships themselves. And into this tense environment, the USS Cyclops sailed. Though a non-combat vessel, the Cyclops was not a civilian freighter. She flew the U.S. Navy ensign. Her sheer size and unique cargo, thousands of tons of manganese ore, essential for hardening steel used in weapons, made her a high-value target. If intercepted, she could not outrun or outgun anything. Her defense was obscurity and luck. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, multiple ships traveling in and out of the South Atlantic reported U-boat sightings. German submarine U-156 had been spotted as far west as the American coastline, while U-157 was rumored to have slipped past British patrols near the Cape Verde Islands. Though the Cyclops route from Brazil to Baltimore was considered low risk compared to the North Atlantic crossings to Britain or France, no journey was truly safe. Compounding the danger was the strategic significance of manganese. At that point in the war, American and Allied war industries were desperate for the mineral. The steel factories in Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Philadelphia were churning out tanks, artillery, ships, and weapons at unprecedented rates. Manganese, mined in South America, especially Brazil, was key to producing resilient war-grade steel. This made ships like the Cyclops vital, but vulnerable. The cargo wasn't just valuable, it was dense and volatile in motion. If improperly loaded or distributed unevenly in the hold, it could shift in rough seas and destabilize even a massive vessel. Manganese had an unfortunate tendency to absorb water and settle unpredictably. A heavy swell, a rogue wave, or sudden maneuvering could compromise a ship's balance and cause it to list, or worse. Navy analysts later admitted that no escort had been assigned to the Cyclops for her return voyage. She would sail alone, without destroyer support, relying on a zigzag pattern, a rudimentary evasive technique, to avoid U-boats. But zigzagging was of little use if the enemy had already marked you. Then there was the weather. While historical records from early March 1918 show no reports of hurricanes or major storms in the Caribbean or mid-Atlantic, later studies of maritime logs suggest a tropical depression may have developed near the Bahamas around March 5th to 6th. Some meteorologists believe a sudden squall or rogue wave could have struck the Cyclops as she passed through that region, especially if the ship was already overloaded or structurally compromised. It's worth noting that other vessels disappeared under similar conditions during the war years. The Proteus and Nereus, sister ships of the Cyclops, vanished years later in eerily similar circumstances, while carrying similar cargo along similar routes. The U.S. Navy would quietly retire the class of colliers soon after. But while enemy action remained the prevailing explanation for most maritime losses at the time, there were no German records, no U-boat logs, and no post-war German accounts claiming responsibility for the Cyclops. It was as if the ship had slipped through a crack in time. The families of the missing held onto different beliefs. Some suspected sabotage. Others blamed the weather. A few clung to stranger theories, German raiders, secret islands, even supernatural forces. In Washington, officials quietly whispered a darker thought. Was the Cyclops betrayed from within? Between wartime paranoia, a compromised cargo, and the psychological instability of the ship's captain, there were too many unknowns. No distress signal was ever sent. No wreckage ever washed ashore. No survivors ever returned. All the Navy could confirm was that the war in the Atlantic was unforgiving, and the Cyclops, caught somewhere between duty and doom, had vanished into its depths. In the final days of February 1918, the USS Cyclops steamed northward from the port of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, carrying more than 10,000 tons of dense manganese, or a critical resource for the U.S. war effort. Her destination was Baltimore, Maryland, nearly 5,000 miles away. It was a route she had traveled before. Routine. Familiar. But this time, something was different. From the moment the Cyclops departed, it seemed as though a shadow had fallen over the voyage. Her cargo, for one, was unusually heavy. Reports suggest that she may have been overloaded, with her holds packed tightly to the brim. Witnesses in Rio noted the ship riding lower than usual in the water. Some observed visible strain on her hull. The manganese, though vital, was notoriously unstable in bulk, prone to shifting and compacting dangerously during long voyages. Even more troubling, one of the ship's main engines had reportedly been malfunctioning during her time in Brazil. It's unclear if full repairs were completed before departure. If not, the Cyclops would have been forced to rely on a single engine, limiting her maneuverability and speed, both critical in a region where German U-boats and sudden storms posed constant threats. Still, on February 22, 1918, the Cyclops departed Rio, her steel bulk slicing through the South Atlantic. Her course took her north along the eastern coast of South America, eventually entering the Caribbean Sea. On board were 306 souls, sailors, officers, stevedores, engineers, and support crew. It was a multicultural mix: white and black servicemen, immigrants, career Navy personnel, and first-timers. All of them now sailing into history. The first and last confirmed stop came on March 3rd, when the ship pulled into Bridgetown, Barbados, to refuel and take on fresh water. The docking appeared uneventful, though later interviews with dock workers recalled something odd. The ship was listing slightly, as if unbalanced. A British customs officer later claimed the crew seemed tense. Some came ashore but didn't linger. Several men were seen inspecting the hull from small boats, but no repairs were made. Captain George W. Worley reportedly went ashore briefly, filed no reports, then returned without explanation. Then, on the morning of March 4th, under mostly clear skies, the Cyclops left Barbados and headed northwest, straight into the open Atlantic. And that was the last time anyone ever saw her. No further communications were received. No SOS. No distress flares. Nothing. When the Cyclops failed to arrive in Baltimore by her expected date around March 13th, the Navy waited. Delays weren't uncommon, especially during wartime. Ships were often rerouted or slowed by weather, enemy threats, or cargo issues. But by March 20th, concern turned to panic. The U.S. Navy initiated a full-scale search. Ships were dispatched to patrol likely routes. Messages were sent to Allied vessels. The British Royal Navy checked their logs. Radio transmissions were analyzed. Ports along the Caribbean and eastern seaboard were alerted. No debris. No survivors. No sightings. The ocean offered not a single clue. Back in Barbados, authorities revisited the last docking. One harbor official claimed he heard sailors whispering about a fight on board. Another said the ship had been unusually quiet at anchor. No music or laughter from the crew. A steward at a local hotel recalled a group of young sailors drinking the night before departure and toasting to the last good night. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazilian port workers noted that Captain Welly had seemed more agitated than usual during the loading of cargo. He reportedly ordered the deck cleared twice and shouted at officers in front of civilians, rare behavior even for the Stein commander. Family members back home were contacted. Wives, mothers, and sons began receiving telegrams marked missing, status unknown. As the days passed, theories multiplied. Or was the ship struck by a German U-boat? But no enemy submarine ever claimed the kill, and no wreckage was found. Did the manganese shift, causing the ship to capsize or break apart? Possible. But the ship was built to endure heavy loads, and the sea had been relatively calm. Did Captain Welly intentionally disappear the ship? Mutiny? Espionage? No survivors surfaced. No documents emerged. If there was betrayal, it was buried with the ship. Even weather data provided no clarity. The U.S. Weather Bureau later confirmed no major storms in the area between Barbados and Baltimore during that window, though sudden squalls or rogue waves can strike with little warning and leave no evidence behind. By April 1918, the Navy officially declared the ship lost. It was the single largest non-combat loss of life in U.S. Navy history at the time. 306 men vanished. No trace has ever been found. Not a single life vest, lifeboat, or plank of wood. The Cyclops had departed Barbados as a steel giant, slow, heavy, but seemingly indestructible. And then, as if swallowed by the sea itself, she was gone. In the official record, the USS Cyclops vanished sometime after leaving Barbados on March 4, 1918, bound for Baltimore. That's where the Navy's paper trail ends. But outside the bounds of bureaucracy, on ships, in coastal towns, and through whispers at sea, rumors, sightings, and half-heard transmissions began to spread. Could the Cyclops have been seen again after she was gone? The most credible unofficial report came from the crew of the SS Amalfi, a British merchant steamer traveling northbound from Trinidad to Norfolk. According to their logs, on March 5th, they spotted a large U.S. Navy collier roughly 150 nautical miles northeast of Barbados. The ship's silhouette, black hull, and two towering masts matched the general profile of the Cyclops. No flag signals were exchanged. No name could be clearly seen. We thought it was the Cyclops, the first mate later told British naval investigators, but we didn't know she'd gone missing yet. She was moving slow, seemed heavy in the water. By the time the Cyclops was declared missing weeks later, the SS Amalfi was in dry dock and her crew dispersed. The sighting was not immediately followed up by U.S. intelligence, and its details were never officially confirmed. Still, the Navy recorded it as a possible, though unverified, post-Barbados location. Another curious claim came from the Dutch freighter SS Cormoran, which reported intercepting a faint Morse transmission on March 6th, two short bursts of code, distorted by atmospheric noise. According to the radio officer, the message included the call letters NCYC, believed to have been the Cyclops radio identifier. The transmission reportedly cut out before more could be heard. Could it have been a distress call? The Navy dismissed the report as coincidence. Radio interference was common, and wartime paranoia often led to false alarms. But for years, amateur radio historians insisted the transmission may have been real and cut off by sudden disaster. Then came the sightings that veered further into the speculative. On March 7th, a Bahamian fishing vessel from Eleuthera reported seeing a very large, dark ship on the eastern horizon, moving slowly, then vanishing behind a storm cloud. The fishermen described the ship as strange, too quiet, and said they had never seen a vessel that size so far east of the common routes. One claimed he saw smoke, but not from the funnels, He said it looked like black smoke coming from the middle of the ship. Investigators wrote of the sighting. The men were experienced seafarers, but had no way of confirming what they'd seen. No physical evidence. No coordinates. Just a memory and a hunch. Still, these accounts helped shape one of the working theories, that the Cyclops may have experienced structural failure, possibly due to the shifting manganese, and began taking on water slowly. If her radio systems failed, and if the ship remained afloat for a time before finally capsizing or breaking apart, it could explain how some ships may have glimpsed her in her death throes without knowing it. Then, much later, months after the disappearance, came the strangest report of all. A tramp steamer out of Havana, the Mariposa Belle, docked in Miami in August 1918 with a harrowing story. Its captain claimed that one of his lookouts had seen an abandoned vessel drifting slowly, half-submerged, about 200 miles east of Miami. It was dusk, and the weather was turning. As they approached to investigate, he said, a sudden squall forced them to veer off course. When they returned to the area 2 hours later, the ghost ship was gone. The description matched no known wreck or derelict. The captain insisted he saw no name, but recalled a large black structure with a flat deck and no visible crew. The Navy dismissed the claim outright. No coordinates were recorded, and the Mariposa Belle had a spotty record. Yet, for many, it was the final straw in a long line of eerie, half-seen ghosts. These scattered reports, some plausible, others dreamlike, only deepened the mystery of the Cyclops. If the ship had sunk quickly, there should have been debris, life preservers, oil slicks, something. If it had sunk slowly, there should have been time for a distress call, a signal, a flag, something. But there was nothing. Perhaps that's what haunts the Cyclops the most. Not just that it vanished, but that it vanished perfectly. Without a trace, without a witness, without a reason. And though dozens of ships crossed her likely path in those final days, not one could definitively say they saw her go. The Atlantic is wide, deep, and patient. It keeps its secrets. And the last sightings of the Cyclops, whether real, imagined, or somewhere in between, are now part of a riddle over a century old. By the summer of 1918, the official line was clear. The USS Cyclops was presumed lost, her fate unknown, her wreck never found. But behind closed doors, at high levels of the U.S. Navy and intelligence services, another possibility was being quietly studied: sabotage. It was not an irrational leap. The world was at war. Espionage, infiltration, and sabotage were very real concerns, especially when carried out not on battlefields, but within American borders and institutions. The sudden, total disappearance of a massive naval ship without a trace made natural explanations hard to swallow. And with the revelation that the ship's commander, Captain George W. Worley, had been born in Germany under a different name, suspicions sharpened into theories. Captain Worley had a long career, but his background was riddled with strange gaps and questions. Born Johann Frederick Wickman in Germany, he arrived in the U.S. in the 1870s, changed his name, and eventually rose to command ships in the U.S. Navy. But some believed his old allegiances may have been buried, not broken. While no concrete evidence ever surfaced to link Worley to German intelligence, the timing was impossible to ignore. In 1918, German spies were active in Latin America and along the U.S. East Coast. U-boats had made it into the Caribbean. The manganese or the Cyclops carried was a strategic war resource. Could Worley have steered his ship into the hands of Germany, or destroyed it to prevent its cargo from reaching Allied steel mills? Some investigators thought it possible. Worley had been reported acting erratically before departure from Brazil. He had denied requests for cargo inspection. One officer later wrote that he feared the ship was sailing under conflicting orders. Others speculated that if not loyal to Germany, Worley might have had a personal or psychological breakdown, a mental collapse that led to poor decision-making, an accidental scuttling, or worse. If not Worley, then who? The Cyclops carried over 300 men. Among them were immigrants from Europe, some of German descent, many of whom had not been thoroughly vetted before wartime security measures tightened. A few had only recently joined the ship's crew in Brazil. The Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, compiled a list of potential suspects post-disappearance. One name stood out: Heinrich Ludke, a civilian metallurgist who had boarded the Cyclops in Rio. Though his role was officially to inspect quality, some claimed he spent time in restricted areas of the ship, including near the radio room. Ludke had no surviving family, no verified background before 1916, and, crucially, no reason to be aboard a war cargo vessel. Was he a spy, a saboteur, or just a man caught in the wrong story? The ONI inquiry concluded without definitive answers, but some officers privately believed Ludke could have disabled communications or set a delayed explosive charge deep in the manganese cargo hold, one that would detonate hours or days after departure, destroying the ship's structure from within and sending it straight to the ocean floor with little trace. The most chilling sabotage theory suggests coordinated betrayal, that the Cyclops was handed over to the enemy. According to intercepted German naval logs recovered after the war, U-boats were indeed operating in the Caribbean in early March 1918. U-156 was allegedly near the Cyclops' projected route at the time. But unlike other wartime sinkings, no German commander ever claimed the kill. For 4 years, this absence was a mystery, until one theory suggested there was no kill to report. Could Worley, or another crew member, have made contact with a U-boat? Could the ship have been deliberately sunk or handed over, its men taken prisoner or killed, and the entire operation erased from record? This theory, while dramatic, raises a logistical issue. How could a transfer detonation involving 306 people occur without even a whisper from Germany after the war? Some say the truth was simply too dark to ever be admitted. Among the more paranoid theorists is the idea that the Navy knew more than it admitted, that there were signals intercepted, warnings received, perhaps even messages from the Cyclops that were buried or erased to avoid public panic or to cover up a massive intelligence failure. What if sabotage had occurred, not just on the Cyclops, but in Navy leadership? Could treason at sea be buried beneath red tape, silence, and time? Officially, all inquiries concluded no evidence of foul play. But the truth, by then, was as deep as the ocean floor. The sudden, unexplained disappearance of the USS Cyclops left a void not only in naval records but in the imagination of the public. And it didn't take long for the ship's fate to become a key piece in one of the most enduring maritime legends of the 20th century, the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, is a loosely defined region of the western North Atlantic Ocean, roughly bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Over the decades, it earned a reputation as a watery graveyard for ships and planes that simply vanished without explanation. The Cyclops, its disappearance occurring within this general area, quickly became a cornerstone of the legend. In the years following the Cyclops Vanishing Act, the story was often referenced in newspapers, books, and radio programs discussing mysterious disappearances at sea. Writers and investigators looking for a perfect storm of unexplained maritime losses pointed to the Cyclops as the archetypal case. The ship's loss was extraordinary. No distress calls, no wreckage, and no survivors, over 300 lives lost without a trace. These facts seem to defy logic and nautical science. How could a ship of her size, designed to cross oceans, simply disappear? For those crafting the Bermuda Triangle narrative, the Cyclops was a dramatic and chilling example that fed suspicions of supernatural forces, magnetic anomalies, or alien interventions. The Cyclops disappearance route ran through waters that overlap with the Bermuda Triangle's most heavily trafficked zones. Between Barbados and Baltimore, the ship would have passed near the Caribbean Sea, the Straits of Florida, and into the western Atlantic, areas notorious for unpredictable weather, strong currents, and submerged underwater ridges. The convergence of these natural hazards in the triangle was, and remains, a significant factor for maritime accidents. Sudden storms and unpredictable sea conditions have been documented in these waters for centuries. Yet the Cyclops vanished without sending distress signals or leaving debris, which is why her case defied typical accident explanations and became enshrined in Bermuda Triangle law. Skeptics argue that the Bermuda Triangle is largely a modern myth fueled by selective reporting and sensationalism. The Cyclops may have simply succumbed to structural failure, cargo shift, or undocumented weather conditions, and the mystery was amplified by the lack of concrete evidence. Historical weather data for March 1918 shows no major storms near the Cyclops route, But sudden microbursts or rogue waves significantly taller than the surrounding seas, could have overwhelmed her. Manganese or cargoes are heavy and known to shift violently in rough seas, which could have destabilized the ship quickly and catastrophically. This theory aligns with naval engineering experts who have pointed out that the Cyclops' design limitations and heavy load were likely contributors to her loss. Moreover, during World War I, many ships were lost due to navigation errors, overloading, or mechanical failure, and their disappearances were not unusual for the era, though few were as famous or tragic. One popular Bermuda Triangle claim is that the area hosts magnetic anomalies causing compasses and navigation instruments to malfunction. The Cyclops' disappearance sparked rumors that her crew might have been led astray by such anomalies, losing their way in the vast Atlantic. However, scientific studies have found no consistent evidence of magnetic fields strong enough in the Bermuda Triangle to cause such effects. The Earth's magnetic field fluctuates, but no more in this region than in other busy sea lanes. Still, it remains a tempting explanation for unexplained cost deviations reported by mariners over the years. From the 1950s onward, writers such as Charles Berlitz popularized the Bermuda Triangle legend, citing the Cyclops as a prime example. The ship's dramatic disappearance without any wreckage or survivors fit perfectly with tales of ships swallowed by supernatural forces or strange phenomena. For believers in paranormal explanations, the Cyclops is proof that the Bermuda Triangle is more than coincidence. It is a zone where the laws of physics and navigation sometimes fail. For historians and scientists, the Cyclops remains a tragic but explainable maritime loss, a victim of wartime pressures, design flaws, and the unpredictable sea. The USS Cyclops disappeared over a century ago, but her story still haunts the seas. Whether as a cautionary tale of naval hubris, a puzzle for investigators, or a legend woven into the fabric of the Bermuda Triangle mythos, the Cyclops symbolizes the enduring mystery of the ocean's depths. Since the USS Cyclops vanished in 1918, generations of explorers, naval historians, and deep-sea researchers have been drawn to the enduring enigma of her fate. The mystery scale and the tragedy of over 300 lost souls have fueled a relentless quest to find the ship's final resting place beneath the ocean waves. Despite the passage of more than a century, the Cyclops has never been conclusively found. But that has not stopped modern technology and persistent curiosity from advancing our understanding of what likely happened. In the months and years following the disappearance, the U.S. Navy and private vessels scoured the Caribbean Sea and Western Atlantic, focusing on the Cyclops' last known route. These early searches, limited by the technology of the time, relied on surface reconnaissance, reports from other ships, and rough mapping of the seafloor. No debris, bodies, or identifiable wreckage surfaced. World War I's end shifted priorities, and the Navy closed the book on active searching within a few years. The second half of the 20th century brought revolutionary changes in marine archaeology and underwater exploration. With the advent of side-scan sonar and submersible vehicles, searching the deep ocean floor became more precise. Expeditions could map the seafloor in unprecedented detail, revealing shipwrecks, natural formations, and anomalies. Several private groups and historians have since launched dedicated missions to the general area where the Cyclops was lost. These searches combined a sonar mapping of the ocean bottom to identify large debris fields, a remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, to inspect targets found by sonar, a historical data cross-referencing to pinpoint probable sinking sites. Yet, none have produced definitive proof of the Cyclops wreck. The Atlantic basin, near the Cyclops' last route, is characterized by enormous depth variations, from shallow coastal shelves to abyssal plains reaching 4,000 meters, 13,000 feet, or more. Strong currents that shift sediment and scatter debris over vast areas. Seafloor topography that includes steep underwater ridges and canyons. These factors make locating a single shipwreck an immense challenge. Even modern sonar scans can miss objects buried beneath layers of sediment or obscured by natural debris. Theories informed by modern exploration. While the Cyclops itself remains unfound, modern explorations have offered clues about her likely fate. Scientists studying the ship's original cargo of manganese note that this mineral can absorb moisture and shift suddenly, destabilizing a vessel's balance. Such cargo shifts are now understood as a plausible cause for the sudden sinking of bulk carriers like the Cyclops. Oceanographers also point to reports of unusual weather patterns and rogue waves in the Caribbean and Atlantic routes. Though no major storms were recorded on March 1918, small but powerful waves could have overwhelmed the ship's decks or caused flooding. These insights support the cargo shift and sinking due to instability hypothesis rather than sabotage or supernatural causes. In the 1990s and early 2000s, several expeditions equipped with advanced sonar and remotely operated vehicles attempted to locate the Cyclops. The Ocean Exploration Trust, led by marine archaeologist Dr. Sylvia Earle, conducted wide-area sonar sweeps near the Bermuda Triangle's edges, hoping to identify the shipwreck. While many wrecks were found, ranging from 19th-century merchant ships to World War II submarines, none matched the Cyclops' size or location. A privately funded 2015 expedition employed deep-sea autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, programmed to map the ocean floor at high resolution. Though some large metallic debris was discovered, none was conclusively linked to the Cyclops. In 2020, a deep-sea research group coordinated with the U.S. Navy to examine historical wreck sites in the Caribbean Sea. This mission, like others, reaffirmed that the Cyclops remains elusive. The absence of physical evidence has perpetuated both skepticism and fascination. For families of the lost crew, the failure to recover the ship or remains denies closure. For historians, it challenges them to piece together narratives from fragments of documents and witness reports. For paranormal enthusiasts, the missing wreck is proof that the ocean holds secrets beyond human reach. Despite setbacks, the search for the Cyclops continues. Advances in underwater robotics, sonar imaging, and oceanographic modeling promise improved capabilities in the coming decades. Researchers remain hopeful that someday the Cyclops wreckage will be located, bringing answers and honoring those lost at sea. Until then, the USS Cyclops sails forever as a ghost ship in history, an unsolved riddle in the depths, reminding us of the ocean's vast power and mystery. Behind the mystery of the USS Cyclops lies a deeply human story. Over 300 men who sailed aboard her on that fateful March voyage, each with a name, a family, and a life cut tragically short. Their disappearance resonated not just through naval history, but in the hearts of loved ones who never received closure. The Cyclops crew was a diverse group, reflecting America's melting pot during World War I. Among the officers was Captain George W. Worley, a seasoned naval officer whose background sparked suspicion, but whose family remembered him as a dedicated man committed to his duty. One of the youngest crew members was Seaman First Class Joseph Joe Gallagher, a 19-year-old from Baltimore. Joe had recently enlisted, eager to serve his country and send money home to his widowed mother. Letters found after his disappearance show a young man full of hope, unaware of the fate that awaited him. Another notable figure was Chief Engineer Samuel Johnson, a veteran sailor from Massachusetts, responsible for the ship's engines. His wife waited anxiously for his return, clinging to the hope that he had been rescued or was safe somewhere. For families, the Cyclops loss was an agonizing void. Unlike other wartime casualties, no graves, no bodies, no physical reminders ever returned. Many families held onto hope for years. Letters were sent to the Navy asking for updates. Some sought private investigations. All received silence or official condolences with little information. The loss also affected communities in port cities like Baltimore and Rio de Janeiro, where crew members had been recruited or spent time before the voyage. Recognizing the magnitude of the tragedy, the U.S. Navy established memorials honoring the Cyclops crew. Of the Naval Academy Memorial, a plaque commemorates the missing, highlighting the Cyclops as one of the largest peacetime losses in Navy history. The Tomb of the Unknown Sailor. While not specific to the Cyclops, this national monument symbolizes all sailors lost at sea with no known graves. In Baltimore, local memorial events mark the disappearance annually, gathering descendants, historians, and naval officers to remember the vanished crew. Through letters, journals, and oral histories, some personal stories have survived. For instance, Mary Gallagher, Joseph's sister, kept a worn-out letter from her brother expressing his excitement to return home. She never remarried and told his story to her grandchildren, keeping his memory alive. In Rio de Janeiro, descendants of some crew members held commemorative ceremonies, preserving the bond across continents. The Cyclops disappearance is more than a mystery. It's a human tragedy. It reminds us of the perilous nature of early 20th century naval service, the sacrifices made far from battlefields, and the families left to mourn without answers. Efforts to tell these personal stories breathe life into the cold facts of history, honoring those lost in the vast, unforgiving ocean. More than a century after the USS Cyclops vanished without a trace, the mystery of her disappearance continues to captivate historians, naval experts, and the general public alike. Despite advances in technology and decades of investigation, the final fate of the ship and her crew remains one of the greatest unresolved tragedies in maritime history. At first glance, the loss of a single ship, even one as large as the Cyclops, might seem like a footnote in the sweeping events of World War I. But the story of the Cyclops is much more than a historical curiosity. Her disappearance highlights several profound truths about humanity and the sea. Of the ocean's power and mystery, the sea remains an unpredictable and often merciless force. The Cyclops reminds us that, despite all our advancements, the ocean can still claim its victims without explanation. The human cost of war beyond combat. The Cyclops was lost without enemy action, a stark reminder that war's dangers extend beyond battlefields, affecting those who support and supply the front lines. Of the limits of technology and knowledge, even with modern sonar and submersibles, the Cyclops has evaded discovery. This challenges us to recognize the limits of our understanding and the vast unknowns beneath the waves. The Cyclops has become an icon in maritime lore. Her story helped fuel legends like the Bermuda Triangle, and she stands as a symbol of unexplained disappearances at sea. Writers, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists continue to explore and reinterpret the mystery, showing how the Cyclops has transcended history to become a part of popular culture. The tragedy has spurred improvements in naval safety, cargo handling, and ship design. Modern bulk carriers benefit from lessons learned, especially regarding the dangers of cargo shift and structural integrity. The story also underscores the importance of transparency and investigation in maritime disasters, to honor those lost and prevent future tragedies. The USS Cyclops remains a ghost in the annals of naval history, a ship whose disappearance still invites speculation, research, and remembrance. Her story is not just about mystery or loss, but about human curiosity, resilience, and the enduring need to seek answers even when none are certain.